Good morning. Happy Thursday. I wish I could be with you today, and I hope all of you are doing okay. My aunt passed away over the weekend, so I am in Tekamah, Nebraska today, being a pallbearer for her funeral. I will be back with you tomorrow on Friday, and I look forward to our journey together as we study World War II. It's actually going to take us about 2.5, 3 weeks to study World War II. And today and tomorrow, I'd like to say that we're going to look at a topic that I refer to as local aggression that ignites World War II. That illustration you have in front of you, on the left is the leader of Italy during the 1930s. In the middle is a painting of Adolf Hitler, the leader of Germany in the 1930s and 40s. And then the picture on the far right is an illustration of Emperor Hirohito, who is the leader of Japan in the 1930s and the 1940s. These three men here are going to form an alliance which is going to be known as the Axis powers during World War II. Before we can really grasp what's going on and that's going to set off World War II, there's two concepts we need to look at before we can look at local aggression tomorrow. One of those things we need to look at is the League of Nations. See, the League of Nations was formed after World War I. If you recall, the world had never, ever seen a war like World War I before, the first modern war in our world's history. And if you recall, the United States sat out of the war, and when we did enter the war, we hoped that World War I, or the Great War as it was called back then, but we were hoping World War I, if dealt with correctly, could possibly be a war to end all future wars. At least that was the goal of the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson. So the World War I is over. The Big Four, Italy, Great Britain, France, and the United States, meet in Versailles, France, to come up with peace terms for the end of World War I. Again, Woodrow Wilson is hoping that this is a war that's going to end all future wars. In other words, there will be no hard feelings when this treaty process is over. Well, he's the only man that feels that way. Great Britain, Italy, and France all see this treaty process as a way to gain power and limit the power of Germany. Woodrow Wilson went along with all these harsh demands as long as he was able to get one thing that he wanted. And that one thing he wanted was an international organization that he referred to as the League of Nations. So the League of Nations is formed after World War II. After World War I. And the goal of the League, the goal of this international organization, is anytime there is an international issue, anytime that there is tension between two or more countries of the world, instead of fighting, come to the League, come to this body, and work out an agreement. So the goal of the organization is to settle local disputes before they become a conflict. It sounded good. It sounded like almost every country in the world bought into it and joined the League of Nations. President Wilson was pleased. However, there was one country that refused to join the League. And that one country that refused to join the League that was proposed by Woodrow Wilson in some ways might surprise you, and again, in some ways may not. That one nation that refused to join was the United States itself. Remember, before World War I, the United States just wanted to be left alone. That feeling of isolationism. We didn't want to be part of. We didn't want to get involved in other countries' affairs in Europe. Well, remember, after World War I, that sentiment kind of came back, and most Americans, not all, but most Americans didn't want to get involved in international affairs. They wanted to be left alone. So here we are, the strongest country in the world. We don't join this international organization that was put together by our president. That's one concept you need to understand before we look at World War II. This League of Nations, this international organization whose goal was to settle local disputes before a conflict would erupt, proposed by our own Woodrow Wilson. And the only major country not to join this league was ourselves. The second concept we need to look at deals with economics. By the late 1920s, for most people in the world, life was slowly getting back to normal. Peace, posterity. Things were starting to come back into normal. Conditions here for most people were great. It had always been good during the 1920s. However, something started to happen in the late 1920s that's going to totally change the world. And that is, well, maybe you can figure it out from this picture here I have for you. But in 1929, the world and the United States experiences a worldwide economic slowdown. Here in the United States, 1 out of 4 adults is going to lose their job and not be able to find one. Just imagine if 1 out of 4 of your families lost their job. How that would impact not just your family, but the community. And here, everyone after World War I had turned to the United States because we were the only country that was, well, we were the most powerful country, and we were kind of like everyone was turning towards us because of the little damage done. And even we suffered through this huge depression. What causes it? Oh, there's just not one reason. It's a great example of multiple causation. Prices were going up faster than people's paychecks. People couldn't afford to buy the things that they needed for their families. There was a huge decrease in the price of agricultural goods. Now think about it. After World War I, think of the conditions in the rural areas in Europe. So for many years, people in Europe depended upon the farmers here in the United States for agricultural goods. And we know our basic economics. Demand is high, that's going to drive the price up. But eventually, conditions are going to improve in Europe. Europeans aren't going to need those agricultural goods made in the United States. going to drive the price down. It's going to hurt the American farmer. As people start to hurt economically, as people start to hurt financially, there's going to be a decrease in the sale of manufactured goods. People just aren't going to need the manufactured goods. They're not going to be able to, oh, they're going to need them. They just won't be able to afford to buy them. So there's going to be a decrease in the demand for manufactured goods, and then think about it. It makes sense if you're a owner of a factory and people aren't buying your product, you're going to have to lay off your workers, and the more workers are laid off, the less demand for products it's going to be. It's just going to be a spiral or a cyclical downward effect for workers, just not here in the United States, but around the world. Here in the United States, we deal with this economic problem by making internal improvements within our country. Better roads, more roads, building of dams, building of our infrastructure. Other countries are going to take different approaches. We'll look at those approaches tomorrow. If there's time left, I'm going to have you start watching a video about the beginning of the clouds appearing. They're going to bring about World War II. If you don't have time to watch that today, don't worry, we'll begin and finish watching it tomorrow or the next couple of days. You have a good day, and I'll see you tomorrow.